Let me give a bit of the background of the presentation today. I have to read a bit. In the humanities, research is approached differently from the way it is in the natural and social sciences, where data and concrete evidence are required to draw conclusions. Because the human experience cannot be adequately informed by facts and figures alone, humanities research employs methods that are interpretive and analytical in nature, with data gleaned from texts, artworks, history, observation, and a wide range of disciplines. This presentation aims to explore the ways in which the humanities pursue and generate knowledge, and in particular, focuses on specific modes of inquiry in the humanities, including types of research questions, analysis, deconstruction of arguments, and the methods used in dealing with interpretation. That is actually the abstract of Dr. Norman's presentation today. I think without a further delay, I would like to pass the session to Dr. Norman. Pass to you, Dr. Norman.
All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and very good morning. So thank you, Honorable Ismail, for the introduction. First and foremost, I also would like to thank Pejabat Timbalan Nat Chancellor Pendidikan dan Inovasi for inviting me to share, to have this sharing session this morning. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone who are joining us this morning. I would like to present and talk about modes academic domain of the humanities. Okay, allow me to begin my presentation by invoking the phrase that constitutes my the subtitle of my presentation, "The Glint of Light on Broken Glass." So this phrase actually is taken from the quotes by Anton Chekhov, Russian playwright and short story writer. It goes like this: "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass." So, of course, these quotes can be read or interpreted in a number of ways. And perhaps in the arena of creative arts or creative writing in particular, this emphasizes the idea of showing rather than telling. So this is one of the golden rules of principles that is very much used in the teaching or in the practice of creative writings or any practice of creative works in general. Show, don't tell. So the rule is show. We have to show, don't tell that much. So that's the rule. This resonates very well with the inquiry, with the, especially scholarly inquiry in the humanities as an academic domain and tradition. Because in the humanities too, one has to be quite articulate, to be expressive when it comes to writing and articulating our ideas and points. So, in the humanities, the mode of inquiry relies very much on insight and judgment. So the persuasiveness of this particular approach or study depends on the rhetorical force with which the case is made. So one has to argue to construct a persuasive or sound argument in order to to provide the evidence, the showing that I mentioned just now. So in this respect, showing does not simply mean showing in the very direct or literal sense. So forms of evidence is different, very much different from those in the sciences, or different from the empirical approach, which very much based on experience derived from the senses, very much through experiment and observation. So I will come back to this in due course, of course. As an introduction, I would like to highlight these 4 broad ways of knowing how, historically speaking, how knowledge has been disseminated. There are 4 useful way of thinking about how different epistemological systems operate. The first phase, this is like 4 ways and also 4 phases of knowing, of how one acquires knowledge as well. The first one is ways of knowing in oral cultures. So this is very much the epistemological foundations of the early civilizations before the introduction of writing. So the society itself was called oral societies. So these oral cultures, these oral cultures also, oral tradition has been for quite some time. Even in contemporary times, we still witness these oral cultures as a way of knowing. From in academia, for example, we have this viva voce session to performing arts. Theater, monologues, stand-up comedy, and so forth. So all these are still being practiced. The traditions of orality. The second one is classical epistemology and rhetoric. This has to do with the tradition developed by a number of thinkers and philosophers in ancient Greece before centuries, where Greek city-state or polis was built around a central marketplace or agora. It is called agora, where debates was practiced and also witnessed an early form of democracy. So this is where the idea of logic, rhetoric as an art of debate, as well as logical systems of argument were introduced during this ancient Greek time. Were introduced, and all these systems and approaches have long underpinned the research methods pursued in the spheres of arts and the humanities. And the third one is the modern way of knowing, very much in tandem with the scientific revolution in the late 17th centuries and throughout the 18th centuries up until today. So this of knowing, where rational thought was championed over traditions and spirituality, as well as there emerged a number of scholars and thinkers who argue that knowledge could be measured and quantified. So this is a very modern way of knowing. And finally, the final phase is postmodern ways of knowing, with the emergence of post-structuralism in the Western epistemology. So this is very much nowadays very much influential and dominant form of epistemology that has influenced the humanities and social sciences. When a number of philosophers and thinkers and scholars have become cynical and critical towards the science and technology, what the science has brought about in terms of the side effects, negative implications, and so forth. So they start to question. But the notion of postmodernism has been very much controversial too, very much contentious and problematic to a certain extent. So the second phase, just now I mentioned, classical epistemology and rhetoric, can be seen as an example of a culture of knowledge. So I think this is where the styles, modes of inquiry in the humanities began to develop and flourish. So ancient Greek thinkers such as Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates introduced concepts such as logic, epistemology, and rhetoric, as I mentioned just now. So such a practice has witnessed the structuring of ideas and also rational system of thoughts and argument that inform and also the structure of ideas through debate and rational system of thoughts and argument. Okay, this system of thinking, argument, and the art of rhetoric has long underpinned research methods, as I mentioned just now, in the arts and humanities. And so before I talk about modes of inquiry in the humanities, let me introduce you to all of you the humanities as academic domain. The humanities are all about what it is to be human, simple as that. So it has also become branches of knowledge that concern themselves with human beings and culture, with analytic and critical methods of inquiry derived from appreciation of human values and of the unique ability of the human spirit to express itself. So as a group of academic disciplines, the humanities are distinguished in content and method from the hard sciences, from natural and applied sciences, and somewhat less decisively from the social sciences. So the humanities include the study of all languages and literatures, cultures, religions, the arts, all forms of arts, from visual arts to performing arts, archaeology, history, jurisprudence. Jurisprudence is a theory and philosophy of law and philosophy. So as well, those aspects of social sciences, which have humanistic content and employ humanistic methods. Since the 19th century, the humanities have generally been defined as the disciplines that investigate the expressions of the human mind. So all humanities discipline that deal with the arts and creative field of study are considered or normally grouped under the umbrella of the humanities. For example, literary studies, theater studies, musicology, film studies, linguistics, art history, visual culture, and there are more, of course. So all these disciplines critical studies of each field, of each creative field, like literary study, of theater studies, and musicology. So these are critical studies actually. So and of course many for your information, there are so many there are always issues and always issues when it comes to the humanities as an academic domain. Even we have witnessed that there are a number of universities, programs and departments that concern with the humanities, have been shut down or have been abandoned altogether, on the grounds that there's no scientific basis, or they lack a market value, or they add little to the net worth of the nation state and so forth. So sad to say, the humanities has been, especially of course in Malaysia, has been very much marginalized and sidelined, and this particular approach, modes of inquiry also has been struggling in an environment to legitimize itself, to find a legitimacy and place where in an environment where hard science is much favored and prioritized. So this is modes of inquiry in the humanities. The first is the inquiry process in the humanities. This is the structure of what I'm going to talk about. And the second one is the types of scholarly inquiry. The third one is interpretation. Humanities very much concerned with interpretation as its primary methods. And then evidence, acceptable evidence in humanities. So the inquiry process, the overall goal concerns the exploration and expansion of the human experience. So it involves inquiry or questions, query into, or questions about consciousness, values, ideas, ideals, in order to describe how experience influences or shapes our understanding of the world. So also it concerns questions of a significant insight, imagination, and the meaning of human experience. So making meaning or generating meaning, for example, is a key word here in the humanities when it deals with interpretation. So next, I would like to share with you the types of scholarly inquiry or types of academic research that normally pursued in the field of the humanities or in the arts and humanities. The first one is literary and art criticism. Critical art or literary researchers use their own interpretations of art and literature in analyzing it, to analyze the text, especially this concern with the text, while investigating the complex context from which artwork or literature has come, in order to provide an understanding of how it fits into the larger realm of human experience. So one of the main methods or typical methods of data collection or data analysis is called textual analysis. So this type of inquiry normally deal with interpretation of the text. So so this is the example. So in the performing, in the arts and in the humanities in general, text encompasses a broader connotation or meaning. So a text does not only include the written document or the written forms of text, but it also entails other forms as well, such as any artworks, from performance, on stage, theater, movement, dance, painting, visual arts, sculpture. All these are considered texts, as well as moving images, motion pictures such as film, animation, game. All these are considered, and design are all considered texts because they can be read and interpreted. They can generate some kind of meaning. So that is what we call text in the humanities. So this is some of examples. For example, this Gender, Islam, and the Malay Nation in Fatimah Busu's Salam Maria by Malaysian literary scholar Wong Sok Kun, where she investigates this idea of the representation of gender in relation to Islam, and also the notions of nation. So this is an example of literary criticism or literary studies. Also, Timothy Barnett focuses on Malay films of the 1950s and 60s, focusing on blindness, modernity, and tradition. And Muhammad Anis Maknoor, our dance scholar, focuses on Zapin as ritualized dhikr, silent remembrance of God through music and dance. Yeah? And then historical research is the second types of scholarly inquiry. So historians or historical researchers attempt a systematic documentation of the past events or of the past, within which the causes and consequences of human actions are traced. So there's also a number of methods used when it comes to historical research. One of them is historiography. Yeah? These examples, the first example is Farish Enor, who focuses on the deconstruction of Hang Tuah as a national hero, where he argues that Hang Tuah is very much a hero for the whole Southeast Asia instead, not as only for ethnic Malays, hero for the ethnic Malays, very much informed by cultural essentialism, narrow kind of understanding of cultural identity. So he tried to, argues and discuss further with regard to the idea of Hang Tuah is a more cosmopolitan kind of icon or figure in our national and imaginary and historical discourse. And Tan Sui Beng, for example, also focuses on her excellent study of bangsawan, our performing arts, traditional performing arts, focusing on the social and stylistic history of popular Malay opera. Bangsawan, where Tan Sui Beng argues that initially bangsawan was very much hybrid in terms of cultures and identities. Then there's a stage at which it was, promoted as Malay, very much associated with the notion of Malayness. This is in tandem with the rise of Malay nationalism prior independence and after independence, as well as the national cultural policy, another phase in the early 70s. And then philosophical research. So normally philosophical researchers normally investigate the truth and principles of being, ontology, knowledge, epistemology, human conduct, morality, and beauty, or what we call aesthetics, as well as frame a coherent logical system of the general ideas of humanity. So this is some of the theses as well as articles on philosophical research. One is by our own scholar, Lim Kim Hui. He studies the Buddha mind, a philosophical study of Malay ways of reasoning and emotion in pre-Bahasa. Also studies on Jalaluddin Rumi's philosophy of love, as well as philosophy in the work of Gil Deleuze, one of the influential postmodern thinker or philosopher from Europe. And another one is, this is quite contemporary, quite current, where practice, any artistic or creative practice are now considered also as a form of scholarly inquiry or as academic research. So artists, authors as researchers, normally the researchers are among the artists themselves. They attempt to capture for others their own lived human experiences and their own understanding of the world, through their creative practice. So the example here is landscape painting as critical cross-cultural art practice. There's also this a British documentary filmmaker, Daniel Gillian's. She pursued her doctoral studies with a thesis titled Memory, Place and Subjectivity, Experiments in Independent Documentary Filmmaking, Performance in Ecology, the next one, a practice-based approach. So this is all artistic or creative practice as we say. So all these are types of scholarly inquiry in the humanities. So there's also this is very current, but it has been for quite some time over the last 40 years. But recently, this is very much has been very much talked about in the humanities. That is digital humanities. Once it was called humanities computing, where it is now recognized or acknowledged as an emerging discipline, and is very much interdisciplinary in nature. So it specializes in the application of computing techniques to humanities research. For example, digital archive, visualization techniques, data analytics, and online publishing. So basically, it originally focused on developing digital tools and the creation of archives and databases for text, artworks, and other materials. So in many ways, also it have these digital humanities have developed new methods from computer-based statistical analysis to data visualization. So it has been very much criticized as well, attacked on the grounds that it eschews or it disregards the essence of the humanities in many ways, because perhaps at times these digital humanities tend to gear towards or preoccupied with the digital as a technology, as a form of technology. So in a way, it helps us expand our understanding of human culture in this digital world today. So the next one is the methods used in the humanities. Basically, the primary one is, of course, interpretation. Interpretation is very important. It deals with whether the studies or research deal with texts or artworks or any forms of a phenomena. Even to a certain extent, the social sciences also employ this interpretation as methods. Nowadays, like many social sciences, especially in Anglo-American and European world, they are more interested, more inclined towards interpretation, these humanities modes of inquiry when it comes to social science, as compared to and in Malaysia, even researchers or scholars in the arts also in the arts prefer a more scientific approach. But in other countries, even fields such as business and management also, this interpretation method has been favored and has been used, And this interpretation is very much rooted in the tradition of what we call here hermeneutics. That is, hermeneutics is the art, practice, and theory of textual interpretation. So it is very much derived from the religious tradition, you know, especially when it comes to those Abrahamic religions, monotheism, agama-agama Samawi, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which involve the interpretation of holy books or scriptural texts, such as Torah, Bible, and Al-Quran. So, and then in the secular realm, this hermeneutics has been applied in the literary studies, kajian kesusastraan. So hermeneutics involves the ways in which we take in information, and through interpretation we produce or generate what we call knowledge or new knowledge. So so this is the main method, normally primary method for the humanities. Okay, this goes back to my introduction earlier when I mentioned the phrase or the quotes that constitute the subtitle of my presentation today. So because when humanities academics or scholars or researchers, when we have to face or confront those scholars or researchers from the sciences or from the more scientific tradition, it's very difficult to explain, and you know, because people keep asking or keep criticizing that the humanities approach is not valid, cannot be verified, you know, because in general the humanities does not concern with validity or, you know, reliability. So empiricism, you know, empirical method is not, empirical data is not the main goal or the main aims of the, I mean, not the aim of the humanities at all, because we want to explore all this, the meaning of human experience, the significance of human experience. So one cannot question, or one cannot criticize that this approach is not valid, and then they keep asking, oh, how do you validate your data? In a way, yes, there's a kind of, you know, like ways of validating data, but we do not validate data, you know, like those in the sciences, you know. So rather the humanists will make a claim and argue for that claim. So here argument is very important. One has to come up with a thesis statement or a claim, and then throughout the study, she or he will prove the study, you know, through analysis, in-depth analysis, as well as through interpretation. So what is demanded here is not concrete proof or concrete kind of evidence, but sensitivity and perceptiveness. Also, one has to be really proficient in written language. You know, one has to have certain level of proficiency when it comes to written language, to be very articulate and expressive as well, because one has to come up with a very persuasive and sound argument. That's why. So the evidence that is acceptable comes from the interpreter's sensibility, or from the researcher's sensibility, from the artwork itself, the text, as well as from the context. They cast the work into a new light, you know, bring new perspective or new dimensions, or dovetail it into a wholeness we had not originally perceived. So in order to make us understand better, the difference between, to understand better the humanities, so let me share with you the difference or the contrasting approaches, between the sciences. This is social sciences, the social sciences which using a more scientific approach. And this is a typical humanities approach, concerned with number, humanities meaning, so the epistemology, the study of knowledge, the nature of knowledge here is positivist, empirical, and humanities deal with humanist, more interpretive in nature. So some of the methods here, survey, normally used, especially in quantitative study, survey, and then humanities, hermeneutics with other methods as well, methods of data collection and data analysis, such as textual analysis, historiography, phenomenology, and so forth. And the findings, of course, the scientific one is more objective, and the humanities, to a certain extent, are quite subjective. And of course, the sciences are more structured in terms of when it comes to approach, and the humanities a more flexible approach, which allows a change of emphasis as the project continues. Yeah, as the project continues. So a more flexible approach, which allows a change of emphasis. And the paradigm here, of course, the sciences, deductive, because it deals with testing theory, developing a theory that is tested and presents a more scientific or objective approach to research. And inductive, humanities deal with inductive paradigm. So theory is formed based on the data that have been obtained. That means building theory. Yeah? And of course, evidence, when it comes to evidence, the quantitative studies, the scientific one normally use hypotheses, to explore the relationship and differences between variables. And instead, humanities instead use this argument, as I mentioned just now. Argument normally built on a set of reasons, or what we call sound premises, from which a conclusion can be drawn in a logical manner. So this is argument is very much equal to argument is, in other words, is a thesis. So in the tradition of the humanities and social sciences to a certain extent as well, argument is very important, because like when it comes to thesis or dissertation, one must come up with an argument. Otherwise, the work, the thesis, the dissertation cannot be considered a thesis at all. So the argument is the thesis. So the researcher, in the sciences especially, the researcher is separate from the research process. But what is unique and interesting about the humanities is the researcher is part of the research process. So normally one can claim subjectivity to his or her writing using the first person pronouns, so that, like in English, we can use I, for example, to address the reader. So to a certain extent, it's very, even you can even incorporate your personal experience or personal account or anecdotes, to into your writing, into your work, because the researcher is part of the research process, to a certain extent subjective. And for the humanities is to generate new knowledge, of course, even in general, in social sciences, in sciences, to generate new knowledge. So do the humanities, but the ultimate goal, the higher goal in the humanities, is to yield wisdom and insight. Wisdom is that deep understanding that extends beyond knowledge, that extend beyond facts and figures, kind of soundness and quality of judgment, decision based on experience, knowledge, and so forth. So this is contrasting approaches between the humanities and the sciences, the social sciences. So as a conclusion, through hard work, rigorous questioning, sound argument, and profound reflection, humanities scholars or researchers contribute to the dissemination of knowledge that extend beyond facts and figures. So humanities research is unique and dynamic in as much as it seeks to pose or raise questions rather than provide definitive answers, so this is very much unique in a way because it's more interested in raising questions. Through interpretation, as I mentioned just now, we take in information or data and we produce knowledge. Even the interpretation of text, for example, can be considered first-hand or primary data. Particularly in this digital age, the humanities become more important, more crucial, especially in making connection between the human sciences, the social sciences, and the hard sciences. Ultimately, its major aims are to yield wisdom. For this reason, it must be acknowledged as a form of inquiry different from those the sciences. So I really also hope that the universities, especially in Malaysia, including UiTM, the universities should welcome and acknowledge these different and diverse, approaches when it comes to scholarly inquiry or research, academic research. I think it's important to celebrate this diversity or difference, and then because not everything in this whole wide world can be resolved or can be answered scientifically. As I always tell my students, the world does not always, operate in quite black and white, but also it's to a certain extent this there is this in between, there are variegated shades of gray.
Thank you very much, Dr. Norman, for the presentation. Now we open for the question and answer Q&A sessions. If you have any questions, you can ask. Also, you can actually drop your questions in the chat box on the right side. Or you can give any comment or you can give any feedback to Dr. Norman and all of us. You can share. If you have any insights, you can share during this. We've got another about 10 minutes for this Q&A session. Any questions probably from our postgraduate students? Okay, there's one here in the chat box. Dr. Norman, I can read out for you. From Ahmad Nazri, I'm curious to know, does this field of study get funding like hard sciences?
Yes, as is well known, I think it's very, the humanities fields of study, as I mentioned just now, struggling to establish itself, and legitimize itself as an academic domain or academic field of study. And it normally it's difficult to get any kind of research funding. Generally speaking, it's very difficult because on the grounds of because normally this kind of approach does not emphasize empirical data and does not provide to a certain extent a sense of validity and reliability, as well as the one I mentioned on the ground that it contributes little. It is perceived as contributing little to the development of the nation, particularly when it comes to the economy. So I think this has been an issue. This has been an issue when it comes to research funding. So it's struggling at the moment because one, like in Malaysia, this field of this domain is very much this approach is very much less understood by people, as even in academia in general. And another thing is because the field also the currency of the field has been questioned to a great extent because of the contribution, you know, in terms of economy and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, the next question, Dr. Norman, from Lin Ki-ying. Could you give examples of arguments for me to get a better picture of humanities research?
Okay. Normally, when it comes to argument, one has to come up with a conclusion first. So the conclusion normally is a form of claim that we make. So from the beginning of our study, we already established our conclusion actually, but this can change, you know, throughout in the process. So we have like we have to have like preceding like statements, or a set of statements, or what we call just now premises, or a set of reasons, you know. So these sets of reasons that we need to prove when it comes with text, for example, we need to do in-depth analysis and interpretation in order to generate meanings. To prove that this set of reasons or statements, when this set of reasons or statements complement or inform the conclusion, then there, for example, I give you very very basic, very simple example here. For example, in a musical genre, when you talk about musical film, in a musical film, characters are singing. Characters must be singing. So in the Sound of Music, the film, The Sound of Music, all characters are singing. Therefore, The Sound of Music is a musical. So the last statement is the conclusion. So the preceding two statements must support the conclusion in order to have a sound argument, in order to make it sound as an argument. I'm not sure whether it is clear or not.
Okay, next question, Dr. Norman. From Haslin. Can you say that these studies cannot be significantly proved, like the science field? Arguments on hypothesis or statements are needed, but how can it empirically argued? Can it be treated as case studies?
I'm not quite clear in terms of the question. I think yes, one can always, as seen in the digital humanities, one can always incorporate other methods or methodologies as well. You know, from the social sciences, from the sciences as well, in order to make the study more holistic. So it is possible even to have a case study. So even nowadays, many studies or research are out there incorporate, especially in the social sciences in particular, they always incorporate the humanities tradition approach and the more scientific approach as well, or using methods from the social science and the sciences as well. Yes, it is possible.
And then next question, Dr. Norman, from Muslim Ismail. How difficult is it to find research article in humanities in Scopus and Web of Science, especially in Malaysian research context? Is it difficult to find the research articles?
Yes, in the Malaysian context, yes, but there are also a number of journals that publish humanities-based or humanities-oriented articles. One example is the Wacana Seni, Journals of Arts Discourse, published by USM Press. I think, yeah, that is one example where we can find. But even many journals that are placed under the humanities and social sciences in Malaysia also, they prefer the scientific structure when it comes to article writings. So I think this is also a problem. Yeah, there are not many journals when it comes to Malaysia, especially the under Scopus. But there are more journals, Anglo-American journals in the English language, from the English language world, English-speaking world. There are more but even very established, they are not Scopus, journal. They are more outside, of course, especially in from English-speaking worlds, because the humanities in general has been flourishing, thriving in those countries, in Anglo-American and European countries in general.
Okay, next question, Dr. Norman, from Teku Intan. I studied endangered languages and was once asked, how is this beneficial to the modern society and economy? How would you answer that, Dr. Norman?
Oh my God.
Endangered languages.
What? Endangered?
Endangered languages. And how is this beneficial to the modern society?
Oh, I'm not quite sure about this area of studies, because I'm not from language studies of linguistics. I think from the sound of the title, I think it will be beneficial to a great extent, because language is part of human human communication. So it deals with human experience and the ways in which we understand the world. So of course, any studies of language can be beneficial, not only to society, but also to the country as well.
Okay, next question from Rafida. Could you please elaborate on how do we avoid researchers' biasness when the researcher is part of the study?
Yeah, that's why we have to put aside, or we have to a little bit, disregard certain vocabularies when it comes to these humanities. We don't ask whether it is biased or not. It's already biased to a certain extent, because the researcher is considered part of the research process. Even the researcher can claim subjectivity, as I mentioned just now. So it's already biased. So one cannot ask or question whether this is biased or not biased. That is the vocabulary of the sciences. So it is very unfair. This is what's happening in Malaysian academia in general. I'm so sorry. I've become bitter to a certain extent. Like even all these presentations about the humanities, when I agree to share this, to have this sharing session, it always arises out of my frustration, actually. This is very personal. I'm so sorry. But yeah, this is already biased.
Okay, next question, Dr. Norman, from Javaid Dautana. Can we say that humanities is similar as qualitative research?
Okay, that's a good question. Of course, generally the humanities deal with typically deal with qualitative research, qualitative approach. But in the social sciences, for example, there are qualitative approach that is which is cannot be considered the humanities cannot be considered humanistic to a certain extent because, for example, when it deals with in the social sciences, they use methods such as content analysis, more or less similar to textual analysis. But when it comes to content analysis, there will be quantitative approach as well as qualitative. So when it comes to qualitative also, they do the coding, for example. So in the humanities, we don't do the coding. So we use language. We use language, the rhetorical skill to persuade the reader, you know, and to prove our argument, we use the language. We don't code and decode, content. In the social science, the typical one, the social science, yes, the qualitative deal with this coding, decoding, and so forth. So in the humanities, no, we don't do that. When it comes to textual analysis, we purely use language to express and to articulate and to prove our argument. That's why one has to have a certain level of proficiency in written language when it comes to the humanities. It's difficult in that sense. So qualitative can be humanities, qualitative can be scientific as well. I mean, non-humanities as well. All right.
Okay, that's all the questions from the participants, Dr. Norman.
All right.
Yeah, is there anything you want to add, Dr. Norman, or probably from the participants yourself? Otherwise, we can end the session.
All right. Just thank you so much to everyone who who are joining us this morning. And just I would like to thank you. Yes, I hope you have benefited from my humble and small presentation this morning. So there are more, but because due to time constraint and time limit given to me, so I cannot explore further. So of course, maybe in other sessions, inshallah. So I would like also to thank pejabat TNC Pendidikan and Inovasi, especially Cik Sorfina, who has been dealing with me. So thank you so much.